So we got a Patreon listener question. We're going to dive into this one today. As always, if you're a fan of the podcast and would like to support us, we have a great Patreon set up for all of you that has all kinds of different tiers. And one of those tiers is being the Patreon listener question, where you get to ask a question and it'll be read live on the podcast and answered by the Transformers Slag team. Now, that being said, so we got a supporter question today from Zero. And the question he asks is, is there a story to the Transformers Siege toy line? I don't mean the comics or the cartoon, but on the toys, packaging, marketing, and etc., like the Prime Wars trilogy. Not that it had a great story to begin with, but there was still some kind of world building found on the packaging, like the Enigma of Combination, the spin on the Combiners, the Prime Masters invoking the original 13, heck, even the San Diego Comic-Con Optimal Optimus with the Scepter of Sparks and Throne had a little story in and of itself. At least it's not huge, but it's something more than, hey, they're just fighting on Cybertron. Further, does storytelling in toy lines even matter anymore? I mean, can it just be, hey, here's some cool toys, why even care? So, 2 questions there. First one I'll answer is, yeah, there is a bit of a story, but you kind of have to dig for it. He mentions, of course, like, ignoring comics and cartoons, because all the Prime Wars trilogy stuff previously did have stuff that was ingrained in 2 separate pieces of fiction. Number one, all the stuff that was going in IDW Comics that kind of paralleled it, and IDW even had some books that were kind of named after each one of those, whether it be the Combiners or Titans Returns or Power of the Primes. And then you add it to the fact that when you move forward to even with the Machinima stuff, they even did stuff that kind of paralleled what was going on in toy lines. Obviously, both of those kind of suffered from certain gimmicks of each one of those lines being absent, whether it be certain characters not having the Titan Returns Titan Master gimmick or Prime Master gimmick, or some characters in the toy line that were combiners that in the comics or in the Combiner Wars cartoon that didn't combine. But ultimately, in the end, the toys themselves all kind of had their own little story going on, even if you just looked at the packaging there. Now, that being said, let's get to Siege. So, in Siege, the only stuff that really exists from a storytelling perspective right now on the packaging is all the backlight gimmicks that exist right now on it. So, or the Cybertronian. So, if you pretty much take some of the toys and you put it under blacklight, is like a special light bulb that when it's under it, it illuminates in a kind of a neonic kind of light and reveals some secret message. And those secret messages, most of them have been pretty vague or very bizarre. And it's the same thing with the Cybertronian. Like, it would have stuff like light our darkest hour, activate Operation Counterstrike. Autobots, the hour is upon us. And even like some of the Hasbro Pulse stuff, when we had the Megatron, there was this suggestion of like, this is supposed to be Megatron in the pre-days of the war and everything. And that's all we really have from a storytelling perspective. Now, it seems that now that Machinima's not around anymore, now the guys who are in charge of the new cartoon that's going to be being done for the War for Cybertron Siege line, and I know you don't want to really dive into this too much, but it might kind of steer us in that direction, is the guys who are in charge right now, because Machinima doesn't exist anymore, Rooster Teeth, they stated that it's going to be its own thing, and they're going to explain, separate from what has been done already with Machinima. It's not a continuation of the story, and so it's going to be its own thing explaining the origin of the Autobot and Decepticon War. So that also kind of ties into that Hasbro Pulse toy with Megatron and the little snippets of stuff that exist on there. And I think that, and I mean, a lot of people already kind of assumed it, was that the Prime War trilogy was its own little thing, and that was it. And then when we got into the War for Cybertron trilogy, specifically with Siege, we kind of hit that reboot button, and now we're back at, this is Cybertron before the war, on the war, on the war on Cybertron, building up to that. All the characters have battle damage on them. They're beat up from the many years of fighting on Cybertron. So it's I mean, the funny thing is even when you look at it, it's like, if a character has the same form for like millions of years, and that form will be all busted up and damaged from, fighting all those years, as opposed to then when they get to Earth and they scan a new body and they get a fresh new coat of paint. So you could kind of look at it. That's why also the toys are kind of war torn after all those years of fighting. So that I think is kind of the internal story that's going on there from the toy packaging, but there still hasn't been really too much to flesh out. Really, the sad thing is the tech specs are not as big as they used to be, so they don't flesh out each individual character deeply as they used to. There is no fancy kind of big bio or anything like there used to be. And the sad truth is we're really just going off of the little Cybertronian translated here and there and the blacklight stuff and everything. Now, the second part of the question is, do the storylines even matter for some of these toy lines? Honestly, I think that this is kind of the trapping that we ended up in now, which is originally we used to have our main toy line, which would be animated, Transformers Prime, a movie line. And that would be the fictional toy line that it would supplement. It would be the toy line that's attached to something that's on TV or something that's in the theaters. And then we had our classics line that started in 2006 on the side, that later evolved into Universe 2.0 and then Generations. And that was always our fan line. That was the line aimed at the hardcore fans. It didn't have to have any kind of fiction tied to those designs. It was more just, hey, wouldn't you like to see this G1 character updated or this Beast Wars character updated? Like, it was really just that's what that line kind of existed to be. As time progressed, slowly, the fun publication comic was like, hey, why don't we take some of those designs and use them for our own fiction? And then it slowly evolved into that, where it was just like, yeah, we could kind of use these toys and use them for their own fiction and give them a place somewhere. But as it stood, most of the time, it was kind of agreed upon that when you were buying a Generations toy, you weren't buying it because it was tied to some piece of fiction that was supplemental to it. It was more just you're buying Octane because it's Octane from G1, and you have that G1 Octane in your mind, not thinking of like the comic book version that's going to come or that it's currently based on in some kind of supplemental material. Obviously, there is exceptions to the rules. There were certain characters like, let's say, Voyager Springer or Skids from the Generations line that obviously pulled from, let's say the IDW comics and stuff and Last Stand of the Wreckers. But again, that was, I would say, later in the evolution of the Generations line where that started to become a thing as time progressed. And now the entire Prime Wars trilogy, that's the case and moving forward. I still feel that at the end of the day, Transformers, just like anything else, is an evolving product. And what used to be, our classics years ago, which was alternators was what fans wanted. We want modern, modern design and articulation on our classic characters. And alternators came out in like 2001, 2002. And we got that. But even alternators had its own supplemental material. Not in America. Alternators was a standalone kind of thing. But in Japan with the Binaltech toy line, that was the case. But fans, really, people who bought alternators, they weren't buying it because of the deep lore of the Binaltech toy line that was available on every toy written in Japanese. They were buying it because, hey, we got a modern interpretation of Optimus Prime as a pickup truck. We got a modern interpretation of Smokescreen as a Subaru Impreza WRX STI. That was kind of the mindset of a lot of fans. And then that evolution was, people got rid of their alternators and Binaltech and upgraded to classics. And I'm seeing now, what's happening is a lot of people are kind of like leaving out their classic stuff, and for the hardcore, they're just focusing on Masterpiece. And Masterpiece, I feel, is that final evolution in the sense where you're buying it because of the previously existing fiction, not something that's going to be forged moving forward. In the same way, how many people here are buying the Transformers Siege toys because of a fiction to come or what's being based on in the comics right now with IDW? Or how many people are just buying these characters because they like those characters or those designs? That's what it's always really been in the end when it came to the chug, if you will, the classics, Henkei, Universe 2.0, Generations, that bubble. It's always really been you're buying it for the character. And then, it's about the new fictional material or the design after the fact. where with, again, how many people really made decisions on purchasing some toys with, let's say, Prime, or let's say the RID 2.0 series, or even that of Cyberverse, more based on characters you saw on the show. It's usually the chicken before the egg in that case, where you kind of watch it and you go, oh, I really like the way they depict Windblade, or I really like the way they depict Blur or certain characters. And then you then want to go out and buy the toy. It's usually not the other way around. I know that was the case a lot of times with, let's say, even earlier Transformer series, like, let's say, Beast Wars and Beast Machines and everything like that, where you would see the character on the show and go, oh, I want to own a toy of him. And it's funny how that works. That's why it's a very interesting topic that Zero brought up here, and I wanted to talk about it, because it's something that Transformers is a toy line trying to sell, is a toy line that has a cartoon that's trying to sell toys, and that's what it was for years. But as time progressed, the cartoon's stamp and importance on everything to move product has faded and faded over the years. It used to be that the cartoon was the 30-minute commercial for the toys, but as time progressed, it seemed like the toys didn't need the cartoon anymore. It didn't need the movie to move product. Fans just kind of had their own pre-notions of if they wanted to buy something or not. And I mean, that's why we kind of see like how Cyberverse, is now a 10-minute series as opposed to a half-hour series, because they don't even need, that full half hour to sell you on their product. They have their own built-in audience. And of course, with the shrinking toy community and stuff like that, and people who buy toys, it's a whole bunch of different, business jargon to also like look into and talk about. But the way that I see it right now, just to answer your two questions in a nutshell, Siege Line does have a story, but you kind of have to pick at little pieces here and there. There is going to be probably a bigger story that we're going to see later with the Rooster Teeth guys, and it's probably going to be like a War for Cybertron, War Within Dreamwave kind of pre-war kind of story. The origin of the Autobot Decepticon war, if you will. And as for it even mattering, it does. It does matter when it's a line that's based on a pre-existing piece of fiction. Because I feel that at the end of the day, sometimes people want to buy toys and actually have a story with them. There's not many cases with, let's say, these generation lines where you have original characters. It's very rare now that we have something where it's like, oh, hey, here's this brand new character. For every like Slash, and when I mean Slash, I mean like, the extra Dinobot member that we got from Power of the Primes. For every Slash that we got, who was a new addition, which luckily got at least a little bit of character development in comic book fiction. But for every Slash we get 100 characters that are pre-existing, or 200 characters that are pre-existing. So it's very rare that those characters exist. But when you do have a character like Slash, that's when the on-packaging fiction really matters. And unfortunately for her, and she, that's what we got to learn was, oh, it's a her. But unfortunately for her, she had like 1.5 lines on her bio, and that's really it. Unfortunately, if it was the old Generation 1 days or Beast Wars where you had that good, 300 character bio with a tech spec, which also like even gave you a little deeper idea on their technical readouts and stuff like that, and a piece of art that was really well done, you would have had a little bit of a better dive into what that character's story is and their weapons and how fast they move or whatever. Now it's kind of like Slash is there to help the Dinobots. She likes water. It's kind of stuff like that. That's all it is really. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. There's language laws, and they have to do trilingual packaging today. It's something they tested with Energon years ago, and then they kind of moved forward with it. Then they went back and forth, and then they kind of like, okay, we got to do this, we got to do this. Oh, it's a global brand now because of the movies. We got to do this. So, long story short, it is something that matters, but really when it only applies to characters that, in that, again, 1 out of every 300 is an original character. Because I mean, I don't want to like sound arrogant, but most people, when they get a Octane toy, they pretty, the character of Octane has already been fleshed out. It's very like, just look at the lineup of the Siege line. Everybody is someone that has his wealth of history behind him or her. So it's not something that's too, the line drawn in the sand. We need that stuff written on there. It's already kind of pre-established. So again, with the exception of someone like Slash, but such a small example in comparison. Anyways, that's all I really want to mention about that. I mean, I could go on forever about this one, but it's such a deep question that I don't know, maybe it'll come up again in the future when the Rooster Teeth cartoon comes out, and then we could kind of discuss it more. But thanks for the Patreon listener question, Zero. It was a really good one. And again, if you have any questions, be sure to check out the Patreon and sign up.